وبالتالي هم படிச்சு கொண்டிருக்கிறார்கள். الذين خلالهم مسيرية ستقول عن الموضوع هذا بس يمكن هذا اللي قلبهم درسوا ما يجي وبالتالي هم படிச்சு கொண்டிருக்கிறார்கள். الذين خلالهم مسيرية ستقول عن الموضوع هذا بس يمكن هذا اللي قلبهم درسوا ما يجي وبالتالي هم படிச்சு கொண்டிருக்கிறார்கள். الذين خلالهم مسيرية ستقول عن الموضوع.
Hello everyone, I'm very glad to be here. I've not done a talk like this for a very long time, and then not in this country. Just to give you a few words about myself, I came here a very long time ago, in October 1963 to be precise, and I came to study here at university. And there was a military dictatorship in Pakistan, so I could never go back. They took away my passport, effectively. And it was returned 25 years later. So for a long time I couldn't go back, so I settled here. Participated in political life, participated in university struggles, participated in the anti-war movement, and I've always been active against wars, and I'm also a writer. I've written a number of books, made documentaries, etc. What I want to talk to you about today is the world we live in. And the changes that have taken place and the changes that are not taking place in this world. At the beginning of this new century, many people thought that we were going to live in a century of peace, that living conditions would improve for everyone, that civil wars would come to an end, and that people would learn something from the mistakes of the 20th century. But with the beginning of the 21st century, we had a continuous number of wars taking place. There were wars waged by the United States, Iraq, Afghanistan. There had been wars going on the African continent now for the last 50 years in some shape or the other. And then there were civil wars taking place within countries. In my own part of the world, South Asia, two big wars have been taking place. One is, of course, in Sri Lanka, the war on the Tamils. The other is in Kashmir, where tens of thousands of Kashmiris have been killed. And then we have the third conflict, which is a conflict carried out by small groups of people who are powerless, in effect, against the United States. This was 9/11, when a tiny group of people attacked the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, and the world they came from has been punished ever since. And so what we have seen in many ways, and from the side of the West, is a new phase in how to deal with their enemies. And this is where a discussion on torture, the country where it is taking place in a very deep way, is the United States of America. Because effectively, after 9/11, torture was legalized. So it was not a question of torture being carried out by the so-called uncivilized world. Here was the world's most powerful nation actually saying that torture was necessary. Effectively, once they said that, that was it. People said, if torture is possible for you guys to do, we'll do it as well. And we are now in a situation where conditions in relation to torture are the worst that they have been for the last 100 years. And the debates that take place are, should American lawyers participate in dealing with government orders that say you have to torture a political prisoner in order to get him to admit or give us some information. And in order to defend what they call US national security, they have said that torture is possible and has to be carried out. So who do the Asians and Africans who have been tortured by their own governments appeal to any longer? If the world's largest state does it? But you know, one thing we have to understand, that this is not something new. Torture has been going on for a long, long time, from the most primitive period right till now. And of course, in terms of its ability to inflict pain, it has become more and more advanced. You know, when we were protesting against the Iraq war and the Iraq occupation and the tortures being carried out in Iraq at Abu Ghraib prison, an American soldier stood up at a conference I was at in the US. And he wasn't a serving soldier, he was a veteran, roughly my age, except he had long hair and a ponytail. And he had served in the Vietnam War. And he stood up from the conference floor and he said, "You people are talking as if what we're doing in Iraq is new." He said, "Let me tell you a torture I participated in as a US Marine in Vietnam. We captured 2 Vietnamese prisoners. We said to them, 'Tell us where your big group is.' They said, 'No, we will not talk.' So the soldier tells this audience, 'We said, if you don't talk, we're going to disembowel one of you.' They didn't talk. So they disemboweled one Vietnamese guerrilla fighter, and the other soldier saw him die. So they said to the other soldier, 'Now are you going to talk?' He said no. So they just shot him dead. So this soldier said, 'We have done it in other wars we have fought. Why do you always pretend that this is something new?' Everyone fell silent. And then, you know, we know exactly what was done in South America. One day in London, an American walked into the offices of a publishing house with which I was involved. He said, 'I'm a senior CIA officer and I've been working in South America. I've decided to leave the CIA because I can't stand the noises of torture victims anymore.' So we said, what can we do? And he said, 'I'm writing a book saying exactly what I've done and what other people have been through because of us, and I want you to publish that book.' So we said, we looked at the manuscript and we said, this is such an important book that we have to have it published by a very large publishing house. So Penguin Books, one of the largest publishing houses, took it on. His name was Philip A.G. And the title of the book was Inside the Company. The company was the name which people who worked for the CIA called it, you know. And in this book, he described in detail how they had tortured not even prisoners, people taken off the streets. Within 6 months, this book had been published in 4 editions. But no one arrested him because once he had written everything, for them it was foolish to arrest him. He just was not allowed to return to the United States. And we kept in touch. He's now dead. But the last time I met him, he was saying, it doesn't stop, you know. We can write, we can expose them, it still carries on. So the point I'm trying to make is that when the powers that determine the state of affairs on an international legal level in the United Nations on human rights, when they do it themselves and no one ever charges them with crimes, then how can they stop other people doing it? Or why do they need to do it, though? because they're insecure. They feel this is the only way they can defeat the enemy. And they're not afraid of anyone. They're not ashamed. And when their enemies do it, they get very worked up. They get angry. When their friends do it, they ignore it. You know, many Arab governments have tortured people, prisoners and innocents who are not in prison. Nothing has been done about it. In fact, during the big uprising in Egypt, when newspapers were free, they published reports of how the vice president of Egypt under Mubarak used to personally love torturing political prisoners he hated. So there are many other stories one can tell. And you know them better than me in many cases. But how to stop it? The countries which basically have banned torture, Cuba, no one is tortured in their prisons. That is, even the amnesty report suggests that. They are prisoners, but they are not tortured. And more recently, in the Bolivarian republics in South America, in Bolivia, Ecuador, Venezuela, torture is not permitted. So it can be done if there are governments in these countries with the will and the self-confidence to say, this is not the way we are going to get information from anyone. That is the only way, is to try and get governments which believe in doing something for the lives of ordinary people, and politicians who feel ashamed of what they're doing. This type of politician is a rare breed today. I mean, recently I was thinking that what the jihadis are doing, the ISIS group in particular, beheading people, putting it on video, sending it out, and very pleased when the West reacts like it does. But they try to shock the West. But the question I want to ask you, is beheading someone morally worse than shooting him in the head like this? Because most people don't behead now. The way people are killed is using modern technology, weaponry. So why the total shock at the beheading? It's horrible, we know that. But it's to divide what they call barbarism from civilization. Barbarians, civilized, shoot you in the head. For me, both are barbaric. And what one does aids the other. And so this is what we have to understand, that we live in a world of double standards all the time. What one side does is right, what the other side does is wrong. And as long as this attitude continues, it's very difficult to implement laws against torture. Now, I give you one more example. The United States President, the latest, Obama, gave himself the power to decide on immediate executions if the president considers that a citizen, an American citizen, is a threat to the security of the United States. He or she can be executed simply by a presidential order. Now, who does this help? It helps all the presidents and heads of states who behave like this anyway, and now they say the Americans are doing it, so we were right. That's the scale of the problem that we confront. And the United States is not a signatory to the International Criminal Court. So that even if the will was there on the part of a court to prosecute American politicians, it would not happen. The only time this stops is when people themselves take their destiny in their own hands. in parts of the Arab world during the Arab Spring, that's what people did, or they wanted to do. And you know, in Egypt, some of the slogans, and in Tunisia and other places, one of the slogans was, "No more torture." And let me end with another South American incident. When Che Guevara was fighting in Bolivia, the one rule they observed, when they captured prisoners from the Bolivian army, no one was to be shot. They would talk to them, explain to them what they were doing, say why they were doing it, persuade them, come and fight with us. And if they said no, often they would release them. And Guevara argued, this is the way you win over the population, not by killing. And of course, he himself was killed. So it's not that there haven't been attempts to change this, but it's becoming increasingly difficult. And to be honest, it's also becoming extremely difficult for countries that engage in torture to give asylum to people who've been tortured. Migrants trying to flee from the Maghreb to get asylum are often left to die, often thrown off the ships. And a British government minister said quite calmly, no, we can't stop it, but maybe they learned from this that it's not a good idea to try and get into Europe. So things are getting rough and tough on every level.
My name is Tamer Juhmani. I'm from Syria. I am a solicitor and a writer in international terrorism. I was subject to arrest and torture for 3 times in Syria. I'm surprised you didn't talk about Syria and about Bashar al-Assad, and that is that he's a war criminal and how he treats his own people. What's happening in Syria is not an isolated incident. It's a crime, and it's not only affecting the people in the area, it's affecting a lot more people. My question is, do we need to look at humans, how human behaves and human's brain, or do we need to look at the government's view on things?
I think we have to look both at governments and at extra-governmental actors, how they behave. Because, you know, let's look at Syria. A huge popular uprising against the government. The government starts repression. The people respond, initially without any violence. Then groups are formed of different types, and the war gets worse and worse. And the people who are suffering are the ordinary people of Syria, many of whom are now in exile. Many people who started that revolution are now in exile. So here I have no problems in saying that the repression of the government created a situation which is now, for me, out of control. We have a similar situation in Iraq. Despite the American occupation, the situation is out of control. And if you look at Libya, just divided, chaotic, different groups fighting each other. So it's a grim situation. And I have to say this, that the idea that a Western intervention helps is not true. And it's a really bad situation. We have no, you know, one can't support the government or the regime. One can't support the Western intervention, and the people are weak.
I'm from Libya.
You're from Libya?
I'm happy to see you. I'm happy to be here in this program today. I've been tortured in Libya. I also have bullets in my leg. I've been hit with bullets. I've lost my mother because of the militias, the groups you're talking about.
You know, what can one say? I sympathize completely. The irony is that some of the people who were renditioned, picked up by the West, various governments, and handed over to Tripoli, one of whom was tortured, famous name. He is now suing at the moment the British government for having renditioned him. I mean, the ideal situation, Libya, Syria, would be really, I've argued this all my life, the right of the people to decide who they want to govern them, by voting, by casting in, but not in this crazy way in which they're doing it in Libya, where a government is transported from the outside and imposed on the people, so the tribes are in revolt.
Dr. Ali, may I ask you a question? I'm actually somebody who interprets in support of freedom from torture for various languages. I know that you talked a lot about governments and what they do in terms of they are against torture but still allow torture. But most countries have got courts and laws against torture and human rights too. Do you have any faith in the judiciary and in the courts to control governments in any way in all countries, the US, Britain, Europe, and countries in the East as well?
People used to think that a country governed by the rule of law was in itself a guarantee against imprisonment without trial or torture. But that is no longer the case, because they have changed the laws, given special powers to governments, and these powers a court cannot override. I mean, in the United States, it could be argued there are many clauses of the American Constitution guaranteeing free speech, etc., which are currently, they haven't been suspended, but they are being ignored. And, you know, the people who made the atomic bomb, the nuclear physicists, immediately after it was exploded in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, these physicists, and the most famous of them, Robert Oppenheimer, said, physicists have sinned. And today I think lawyers from big corporations in the United States have sinned in taking up the government cases, in some cases actually authorizing torture legally. But let's just move away from torture for 1 minute. The powers of surveillance which the Western countries now have are so enormous that you would have thought they have all the information they need. They don't need to torture anyone, because they spy on everything, on organizations, individuals, computers, everything. So what more information do they need? You know, an individual, of course, one single person can create a lot of damage, and he keeps or she keeps the information in their heads. Such a person they can never find till the deed is done. But by and large, they have enough information within their systems. And that alone, I think, is a strong argument, even from their point of view, to ban torture, to say that it is illegal in any country where it takes place, and that torturers, doesn't matter who the government is or what the organization is, will be captured and tried. Instead, they are experimenting with more and more forms of torture, using drugs, injecting people with certain drugs to see if they speak. Then all this is going on. So these are bad times. Everyone thought that the 21st century was going to be an enlightened century. And you know, when these first attacks of terror began, carried out by small groups of people, we should remember, all the Western leaders said, we must never start behaving like terrorists ourselves. They want us to, but we won't. And state terrorism, how can any individual compete with it?
You are speaking about other countries in the world, what is happening. In the back of step here also, there is torture, which is not physical torture. They make your life and your brain to be torturing in other ways. Because I can take that example to let you to, maybe you know it or not.
Yeah,
like you came in this country, you came to seek refuge. You have children, right? You go to sign in your refuge. Your children are criminals. They give them paper like that to tell them they are criminal. Your children are not criminal. You are not criminal. You just seek refuge from your country to come here, maybe to save your life. And end of the day, you end up like a criminal. Every week or every 3 days or every month, you just go to sign, come out. If you have children, the way they can treat you, that also is torturing. Because the way you are happy for your children, the time you reach there, if they are inside school, you take them out, take them there, sign, come out, and most things you can see it like a. Now I'm happy I see Scottish government trying to speak about abuse. It's like abuse. Your child, take your child bag out, take everything, start to searching in. It's just torture that way also. People are speaking about physical torture. It's not just physical torture. There's mental torture here too. Right.
If we can end on a lighter note, some things have changed. When I first arrived in this country, eating the food here was torture. It was inedible. That has now changed beyond recognition. Everywhere. And one reason it has changed is because so many people from different cultures and ethnicities live in this country. But I want to end by thanking all of you very much for coming and for participating and asking your questions and listening. Thank you.